All right, so we're just, in this step, we're just going to take the bread out of the bowl that we were doing a first rise, and we're gonna dump it out on the counter, just really quickly do a brief stretch and fold. The bread really it gets better flavor, more developed flavor, and nice bubble texture developed if you do a couple of rises. Now you can't, bread basically will rise, over the course of an hour and a half or an hour and 45 minutes or maybe 2 hours and get to a point about here. And then if you let it go for longer, that bread will then start to collapse again. The bubbles won't have enough power to keep that elasticity up. And so it'll start to fall. And for the time being, it doesn't make that much difference. We're not in a real time sensitive part. And what I mean is we don't have to be real precise about our timing right now. I used to do this a lot on Saturdays or Sundays, and I would like run to the store or be out doing stuff, getting beer, whatever. And if we got to the bread now at like 2 hours instead of an hour and 45, or if you really had to do your punch down at an hour and 15, it doesn't make that much difference at this point. But later, especially when we get really near the end, just before we put it in the oven, we want the bread to be just hitting its peak of rise and then throw it in the oven. And often what you find is people will find that their bread at the end is a little bit flat, especially in baguettes. It can fall a little. And that's usually because like it already rose and then it was starting to fall when you put it in the oven. So all to say that at this point, we're still not all that tied to timing. So we could have let this go an hour and a half, hour and 45, 2 hours, something like that. Okay, so we're just waiting for a couple other people, but basically we're going to do this punch down of the bread. We're going to use the same bowl to throw it back in. So I still have a little bit more of my butter. We could also use olive oil or whatever. I still have my little bowl of flour just so I can dust my hands and dust the surface. I've got my trusty sponge and rag, so I'm kind of cleaning off my countertop. I'm only going to use a space about as big as the one that we actually needed on. In the next step, this is lesson 3, I think. So the next step, when we're going to cut it and then roll it out, we're going to actually end up needing a pretty fair amount of counter space. You need the space to work in, you need a place to leave all the dough while it's resting, and then you're going to need to prepare a place to lay the loaves as they're rising. And for that, laying loaves and rising, we're going to use like a floured cloth. So we could use any old kitchen towel like this. I mean, I said that the length or the size of the dough is going to be limited pretty much by what are you putting it on in the oven, right? So most people have, either maybe a pizza stone or just regular cookie trays. All those are fine. They tend to be, about yay big or maybe only about, that big. So we can use some towels like these, and you're probably if you're doing a whole recipe, you'll want to have a couple of these. If you're doing only 3 loaves, probably one's enough. And we'll show you that. We're going to flour them and stuff like that. So we'll do that all in the next step. This one's just a real short one, so I guess I'm going to assume that we're all basically here. So I'm just going to grab, I was rising my dough in the oven again. I sometimes will do a thing where I'll turn on the oven to like 250 for like 1 minute, and then just make sure that I can stick my hand in there, that I can touch the bottom of the oven and it's not super hot. You don't want to cook the dough in any way. I was just kind of creating a little warm space, but you can do it on the countertop as well. So just pulling it out of here. The bowl is nice and warm. That was kind of left over from the oven and from it being in the hot water bath. So we'll switch the camera and get some of this out of the way. So I've got my nice clean counter. If I just want to double check, as we're about to throw that down on the counter, I really want to make sure that I don't get any, hair or dust or, whatever. I mean, it's all going to get cooked in the oven, but, it matters what it looks like. And so this is sort of our little reveal at the moment. Okay, so here's my dough, and you can see it's pretty big. It's still a little, loose and wobbly. If I were to touch it, it's a little sticky on the top, just barely. You can see I can punch into it and it kind of comes back. Okay, so that's sort of what my dough is looking like. How's everybody's looking? Hey, Cliff, that looks good. Nice. All right. Good, okay, so I'm taking this just off to my side a little bit, just putting a little bit of flour. If your dough's really wet, you need a little more flour. If it's not so wet, you don't need that much. I'm flouring my hands a little so that I'm, not too sticky. And I'm just gonna dump the dough out onto the countertop. And if you greased it well and the dough's not too sticky, it should just come right out. If it doesn't, it's no big deal. You can just scrape it loose. If it leaves any little bits stuck to the side, you can just scrape those loose and just stick them onto it. You can see that the bottom maybe is a little bit more open. Like I can see the little, the texture of this gluten kind of being this almost like skin here, okay? So I don't want to leave this down too long because it's pretty light. It's real fluffy and sticky. I'm just going to check my bowl and I'll put a little wipe of oil or butter in that in a sec. I'm just lightly dusting my hands. I don't really need to add any flour to this. And all I really want to do is just stretch the dough and fold it, okay? So I'm just going to pick up this side. As long, if it sticks to the bottom, you can use, one of these to kind of cut it loose from the bottom. If you don't have one of those, you can even use a knife just to scrape it loose. And so I'm picking this up, and I get this nice long skin like this. It stretches a little bit, and then just fold it. Okay, I'm not really even kneading anymore. I'm just giving it a stretch. I do it the same with this side, with a nice stretch and a fold. Okay, so if it was sticking to the bottom, you can throw a little more flour. Again, you can cut it loose with this. I'm making sure my hands are floured enough that it's not sticky. Okay, I'm not really kneading it. I can see all these nice little bubbles in here. Let me bring this up. See all these little bubbles that are starting to form here? That's really good. It means the yeast is nice and active. I got bubbles everywhere. So then I'm just going to pick it up and stretch it again. Fold about a third. Stretch that other side. Whoops, I kind of unfolded it, whatever. That's it. That's about all I really need to do. So just kind of folding it in thirds one direction, turn it, fold it in thirds the other direction. I'm just going to take a little bit more of my butter and make sure that my bowl is still buttered. It's a little bit dry in there because the bread sort of soaked up some of that water and butter. But as long, if yours stuck, then use a little bit more oil. If it didn't stick, then use about the same amount. Can't really go wrong. And I'm going to work the dough in the same way that I did before, just kind of making a little mini boule out of it. I'm just sort of pulling the corners into the bottom, just rolling all of that into the bottom. It's actually a little bit difficult now. And just trying to get this nice little shape like that, where I've got this nice skin on top and all the puckered part is on the bottom. Doesn't really make that much difference. And finish up like this. It's a nice smooth texture. It has a little bit of give to it. It feels a lot firmer now that we punched it down. We took a lot of the air out of it, and we'll just put it back into the same bowl. We'll cover it with the same cover that we had before. And then this one we're going to leave for another, we'll do an hour and 45. So on my clock, it's 12:25. So 2:10, I guess, if my math is correct. So we'll start at 2, and then I can go over some of the materials that we need. And this is, at this point, we're getting we want to be a little bit more precise about our timing. We would prefer not to let this rise for too long or too short, but anywhere like an hour 30, an hour 45, an hour 50, you're fine. So we'll come back, we'll then dump this out onto the counter. We'll use either a scale to cut it into even-sized pieces, or you can just purely eyeball it. If you end up with a few big baguettes and a few little baguettes, they're still all delicious. And we'll have a couple of extra towels around and make sure we have like a nice big and clean counter space. So that's it. I'm just going to stick it back in my oven because I've just been in the habit of letting it rise there. Again, the oven is off, and that's it.